Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Ask Anything, brought to you by Moser Consulting. I'm your host, Angel Leon, Moser's Director of Personnel. We're glad that you're with us for this episode of Ask Anything because today we're going to be discussing audits. So get ready to dive into the thrilling world of audits, a place where numbers tell stories, paperwork becomes a treasure map, and compliance is the name of the game. Joining me to talk about this subject is one of our own, Alphia Stephens. As the Director of Quality at Moser Consulting, Alphia Stephens leads a dynamic team that thrives on the principles of continuous process improvement and exceptional service delivery. With deep expertise in informational technology and a passion for service delivery and customer satisfaction, Alphia has strategically integrated best practices to boost efficiency and quality. The team's dedication to excellence is reflected in their impressive CMMI rating and ISO 9001 certification. Aligned with the organization's culture of excellence, they are committed to delivering innovative solutions that consistently exceed client expectations. Let's welcome our guest, Alphia Stephens, to Ask Anything. Alphia, how are you?
Great. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I have to say, this is one of those topics that is close to home for me. And I mean that in the very literal sense, because the home I share with my wife is an auditor. So this is like literally, when I say close to home, it is literally at my house. So I feel like I know enough to be dangerous, but not enough to know anything. So I'm just going to let you talk about auditing, honestly, because I'm going to be shooting myself in the foot here. And luckily, I'm in the office today, so she can't hear me, bumble through all these things.
It also means a great deal to me because, this time of year, it's tax season and I always get audited. Is that not what we're doing?
Yeah,
that's
why.
Alphia, you take it. You take it.
That's next episode. Don't worry about it.
Yes.
We're going to have a brand new producer because I will be unavailable.
Right? A lot of people will.
All right. So let's talk about audits and what they are and what they aren't. What can you tell us about what an audit is and versus what it really isn't?
From a high level, an audit is really just an evaluation of a person's or a company's, and it could be anything. It could be about anything. So usually we think of audits, to your point, Angel, in terms of our financial documents, with our financial resources. But in my world, in the technology world, it's about processes, our policies, our systems, and how those things work together with our team members and how we're able to improve upon those things, to validate that we're doing it properly, who determines what that framework is, and to improve upon those things, and so that we can do them better, and so that's at a high level. That's what an audit is. What are we doing? How are we doing it? Can we do it better?
Yeah, so it basically takes, to go along what you were saying, it takes a process. It basically boils it down to a step-by-step. If we're talking about processes, it takes it to a step-by-step. Why do you do this? How do you do it? What's the end game of every step? And then like kind of just puts everything, it lays it out on a table, if you will, and kind of asks those questions from a micro standpoint to then a macro standpoint, and kind of just goes off on that. And in the end, what you're hoping to find is that process is being followed to a T, or if it's not.
Well, no, so that's what an audit isn't. It's not being followed to a T. And a lot of people get bogged down on that. Exactly. So there are frameworks and standards about how we do work, but you determine, or, the client determines, this is the process that we're doing. And as an auditor will come in and say, okay, that's a process, and that process is compliant with an overall, standard.
Yes.
So it's not exactly, and is that to a T? It's within a framework, and it's like you define it, and we validate. An auditor validates if you're doing it according to what you say you're doing, and does that fit into this framework. So it's not, you're not bound to somebody else's definition. You define what your processes are, and you follow your processes. And the auditor comes in to validate that you're following the process. You're following the process that you say you're going to do, and move through that process. So you should be able to look at the evidence that you're showing an auditor, and they say, oh yeah, I can see in your process is where you are. So you're not bound to whatever a governing body has defined for you. You define it yourself, and they validate that you're doing that.
Yeah. So basically, it's a validation of the process that
Mhm.
you have in place.
Right.
And if you might be steering one way or another,
Right.
whether positive or negative, then in the end, there's going to be some, I forget what you guys call it. There's going to be some notes, oh my God.
Well, it's called what non-compliance is what it's called. It's what
Okay.
you're going to be labeled.
Okay.
Out of
Yeah.
compliance.
Okay. So let's talk about what's the most important requirement to ensure a successful audit. What does that look like?
Easily, that answer is look for to be successful, like not even just during an audit, but just as a company, that's doing something that, where there are regulations and compliancy things involved. The most important ingredient to that is leadership or executive buy-in. So I can't be successful if our, CEO and CO and VPs aren't behind the work that I'm doing. So and I have to work very closely with that group to ensure that the work that we're doing downstream is validated by the objectives that they set ahead of us. So I take their objectives annually and ensure that we're applying it with the work that we're doing. So everybody at a company is responsible for quality work. And we validate that quality in an audit, right?
Right.
So it doesn't matter what your role is, you're responsible for doing quality work. And that can be vetted, should be vetted against the work that are the directives that we get from leaders, from our executive board to say, okay, these are our goals and objectives for the year. We should be able to see that in the work that we're doing across the board. So if I don't have that relationship with our C-suite folk, then we will not be successful downstream to deliver a quality product.
Yeah, that's one of the key components, not just of an audit, but really just of any project, just having that executive buy-in in general.
Exactly.
So in order to have a successful audit, I think this is very important because you need to get that audit green lighted, if you will.
Right.
So you need that buy-in in order to move ahead. And then you have to look at what you're looking at. What exactly are we looking at? Who's the leader over that process maybe? And are they willing to go through, quote unquote, the ringer?
Right. Right. Exactly. I mean, and I meet with our CEO weekly and monthly about various topics, but it's just to really ensure and kind of touch base at times, like, are we doing the work that you set out for us? Are we in compliance with the objectives that you set for Moser this year? And so we have those touch points, and I meet with the VPs quarterly. So, to just have these conversations and, we review our KPIs and review those things to make sure that we're mapping back and tracing back to their objectives.
Let's go back a little bit to the initial part of the podcast, because we talked about some of the myths and misconceptions about audits. You talked about what they are, what they aren't. Some of those common misconceptions about audits that you like to debunk.
Well, just we talked about, the primary thing is that, we have to follow this thing exactly. And it's never that. And I think that's the biggest misconception. Another misconception is a lot of people don't realize that alignment back to leadership is significant. It's critical. It's critical to the success of the work of the company. It's critical to the success of the work of an audit. So you have to have that traceability and that line of communication and that line of production between those two groups to make sure that everything else is working properly. So a lot of times that's a disconnect, is that people aren't engage with leadership as they need to be. And also they're trying to just, go line by line. And that's, and you don't have to do that. You don't have to be that detailed to be successful in an audit. I think those are the two biggest misconceptions in an audit.
And I'm going to speak from a husband's perspective here, but one of the biggest misconceptions that I think my wife would say is that when you're being audited, it's because you're doing something wrong.
Oh.
Right.
Yeah.
That
absolutely not. You're just validating that you're doing everything right, really. That's when I meet with our team members here. It's like, and the word audit automatically causes angst, right?
Right.
With anybody, even with me, when I'm in it. But it's not that you're doing something wrong. It's like, what are we doing right? Where are we possibly going wrong? And how do we course correct? And then when we are doing things right, how do we do it better? And how do we improve upon our efficiencies? How do we deliver more value to our clients and to our customers? How to provide a better service. That's what to me, that's the intent of an audit, is how do we do better? Not that what we're doing wrong. Even though when we find something, I love to find when we are doing something wrong, because you can fix it, and you can fix it before you get to the audit. because, you know,
Right.
you do ad hoc audits, you know, and we find those things before we get to an audit.
Yeah, and that's something that I've learned a lot from her, in that when she's doing an audit and she finds these things, these
Mhm.
situations that might need correcting down the line, I've learned from her that she normally reaches out to that party before doing her final report,
Mhm.
etc., and says, "Hey, listen, I found these things. Like, here's a list. Maybe you guys can start like fixing some of these things now, so that in my report they
Right.
don't necessarily look this bad this
Yeah,
way."
exactly.
Because it's that conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's that you talked about conversation with leadership, and this is where you would be having that conversation with that
Yeah.
leader of that group, saying, "Hey, there's something that might need some tweaking in this process.
Mhm.
If you change it, I can just basically knock that off. And in the end, when I do my final report, it's gonna look like nothing happened, because I'm informing you, and you're sort of getting ahead of what negative connotation you might have." But
Exactly.
I also want to say that, to finish my point before about audits and people think, "Oh my God, this is a bad thing." Audits sometimes can actually bring up good things and best cases that the organization can actually use as
Exactly.
examples for other divisions or other departments to actually use,
Right.
in order for them to get better, or to maybe better emphasize XYZ process.
Exactly. And two things I want to say to that. One thing that you talked about, the first thing is that it exposes things. And you and I have an example of this. I don't know if you remember. This happened maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago between the two of us. I asked you for a document, and you sent me the link for it. And I was like, well, where's this process written? So to me, so I jotted down a note to self, hey, have HR, draft out this process or direct me to the process so that I can have it in our process folder so we can, where all of our processes are. And so that was, it exposed, a potential gap there, so that's one thing. And then that's what just the work does. Like in my head, every time I talk to somebody at Moser, if something comes up that I can't put my finger on and I don't know where it is, I, try to map that out and make sure that we cover that so that when we're on audit, I say, oh, here are our processes. And I know those things are there because, I vetted those things. The other thing you just said, in our audit, I think it was our last, I want to say it was our CMMI audit. We had to, in the audit, provide some, y'all always are providing your evidence, your artifacts for, validation and compliance. And, I had to reach out to a team member to get some numbers and, but that was unexpected. So I reached out and I got the numbers, and it provided great insight, and it was great news, and it provided great value to us. But to the customer, like, oh, like, look at these numbers. We had never even looked at them from that perspective before. And it provided this is great, not approval, if you will, but it was approval that what we were doing it very well because the metrics were very good. And so you get the good and the bad in going through these processes and through these. So it's good.
And that actually segues nicely to my next question, which is, how do audits contribute to the overall health and transparency of government and business operations? Because talking about those positives, I feel like those do not get reported as much as the negatives on everything, not just right on everything. But I feel like your example about unearthing numbers that actually made us look way better than what we actually were already, it just speaks volumes to that, is that we might not be looking at it from that perspective when we're doing an audit.
Exactly.
But here you are demonstrating that you are, working at a high degree, at a high pace, and you're providing great value.
Right. And even when it happens, the team member who gave me this information, he was shocked. He was surprised. Like, just how great that number was. But I mean, I think transparency, you know what, like in this world of auditing, like, audits are what, a week, depending on how big your hours are generally a week, depending on how big the company is. But, I spend the other, 51 weeks, not getting ready for audit, but, talking to team members, evaluating their processes and procedures and going through these exercises so that when we get to an audit, things are in place. So in doing those other predecessors or, preceding activities, talking to you about that document, you're able to expose things that we need to have exposure to. So, I mean, I should be able to, or an auditor should be able to go into Moser from any perspective and understand the work that we're doing. And those activities get us there, right? And so we shouldn't have any surprises because those things should have already been exposed and addressed. So that's what I love about the work that I'm doing is not, and again, when I ping people for information or put a meeting on their calendar, there is anxiety because they probably know what I'm coming for.
Yeah.
But it's not, to me, it's not, it's from a place of positivity and a place of let's make us better. I'm not trying to, nobody's getting in trouble. It's like, oh, I see there's a gap here. Let's close it. Let's fix it. And that to me is a good thing. So, so I try to approach, our team members from that perspective. So I think just having those activities, consistently throughout the year and making sure that we're above board and everything is not that everything's complete, but it's on our radar and we're addressing it. And so so in the audit, as long as you have a plan that and you can show that you're addressing these things, that's what they want to see. It's not like, oh, we're trying to hide things. It's like, no, we found these things and we're addressing them, and this is our plan to address them. And that is a successful audit. Conveying that to our team members and to other folks that it's never a bad thing. It's always a good thing to expose these things and to fix them.
Yeah. And in the end game, as you mentioned, is to fix whatever needs fixing. And this is not a catch-22. Aha, we caught you. Of course, if we catch you doing something negative, then
and sometimes we take a negative connotation of the word fixing that, and so I kind of like take that back. We mitigate the risk and we exploit the opportunities. We find good things and we can exploit on those and make them better, and and try to maybe push those things around the corporation, around the company, and the other things that are not so good, we minimize the risk. So it just depends on what it is. We make the good better and we make the bad things a little less.
You talked about a positive auditing experience, which is what was my next question going to be about that, because I personally in other positions I've gone through audits, and like you mentioned, it as long as you have a level head and that yes, there's probably going to be some things that you might be either, I don't want to say doing wrong, but doing to a limited knowledge.
Right.
Because let's say you're put into a new position and you don't know exactly everything that entails, and then next week you get audited for something that your predecessor was doing. Well, you still have limited knowledge, even if you've been in a role for 10 years. I'd hope that you know everything that you're supposed to do, but sometimes we don't. So when you're audited, it's more about finding those things and exploiting those things, making it better for the overall. But it's that experience, that auditing experience that you were mentioning. So how do you feel about an auditor's ability to balance the need for thorough investigations with the desire to ensure a positive auditing experience?
In my experience, I've never had an audit with an auditor who's been, I'm going to say off-putting. All of my experiences have been very positive. And so, one, I'm appreciative and I'm probably lucky for that. So I haven't run into that yet. And so in all of those experiences, just because one of the things that an auditor would do is that they reach out to you a week or 2 weeks in advance, can just have a conversation and just get to know you as a person. So that when you're in the audit itself, it's not so cut and dry, you have some kind of rapport because you want to feel comfortable with this person who's asking you, to talk about all of the things that you're doing in your purview. So that's one of the good things that we have. I've already met with our auditor for CMMI twice this year, and that audit is next January. So we know we're well, and so we have that relationship, and we're able to kind of, as we move through the year, we have that camaraderie, and we'll already be investigating things and looking at things and knowing where I can be fixing things, or so having those type of experiences with your auditor is really good, and they help and guide me for instance, in those places, well, we're looking for this. You need to do, be more aware of these things. These are some of the changes that are coming. Just communication and awareness that you're able to get from having such a good relationship with your auditor is going to be very beneficial downstream to us in these audit experiences.
I have to say, when I worked for the government, I had a very cool experience with auditing because I was where I used to work before, there's a process called inspection. So every field office and every division, every department had an inspection. And I was actually able to be a part of an inspection team for the Dallas field office back in 2019 before I actually came to Moser. And It was a lot of fun because I actually got to wear the auditor hat.
Mm.
Again, I am no way, shape, or form an auditor. I don't claim to be one, but for that, because of my expertise in the area that I was inspecting, they tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we want you to be a assistant inspector." And so,
Right.
as you were saying, the relationship building process is, I think, as important as the discovery phase,
Right.
right, of
Right.
whatever it is that you're doing. Because the first thing I did back then was actually pick up the phone and call the people in Dallas that I was going to be auditing, and we started a conversation, and I had my list of things that I needed to ask about. Well, I put that list of things aside, and I just started talking to them about, hey, I'm so and so. I've got X amount of years of experience here at the bureau. Who are you? Tell me who you are. Like, I want to know you and what your experience is. So that gave me an idea of what I was gonna get myself into when I looked at the discovery, because now I knew that I was dealing with, because I was dealing with three people. If I recall correctly, one of them had 25 years of experience. The other one had, I believe, 10 years, and the other one was 3 or 4 years in their careers.
Right.
So now I knew, okay, this is what I can expect. I've got what I would call two good veterans, two people that had experience, and somebody who was relatively newish to their role. So then I knew that when I asked for the samples of the items that I needed to look at, whoever touched that sample, I had a pretty good idea of what to expect. Let's just say. And that really made it so much better for everybody overall. Yeah, because it gave me, I felt a little bit of an advantage in what I was looking for, and the things that I may have from previous experience, from previous inspectors. Like, this is what we were looking at that field office in the previous inspection 3 years before. So then I could just go back and annotate, okay, these are the things that they found that was kind of lacking. Okay, I'm going to go and look at to see if they fixed it over the last 3 years. And then, so that actually, I mean, that was a great experience for everybody, for them and for me, because it allowed me to actually look at those deficiencies. And if I actually didn't find anything that was wrong with them, because
can you imagine had you not had that camaraderie, and like what an audit would be if you didn't have that camaraderie with the auditor? How, I mean, like the anxiety that you would feel, and like how you'd be more prone to make an error or to say something wrong or out of line, because it's just a different, contextualized experience, if you have that relationship. So that relationship building with those folk is very important to make a great experience. I mean, it's an audit, but to make it the best experience as possible.
But you make it as easy and
as easy for both sides.
Yes,
possible.
Because you say that I was on the other end of that spectrum, where I was the one that was being inspected. My programs were, and I didn't have that relationship because the person prior to never communicated with me other than, here's an email, here's the things I want to look at. Pull them, make sure they're pulled by the day I get there. And that's it. The day they got
very
there,
different.
the day they got there, my team and I pulled every sample that they requested, and we had everything on a stack. And they showed up and they're like, hey, I'm so and so, do you have the samples I asked? Yep, here you go. And that's it. Never heard again from the guy until the very end.
Interesting.
Yeah, you guys are good. You guys are good. Yeah, everything checks out. You guys don't have any issues. Great, thanks. So, but to your point, I was a nervous wreck.
Because you didn't have that experience. You didn't have that relationship built already.
Exactly. And so I don't know where he's coming from. I don't know who this guy is. I never met him in my life. I don't know what his background is. I don't know, like, nothing. He just asked me for this 50+ item list, and we're here pulling stuff and pulling, because I had many programs. So I'm pulling HR files. I'm pulling evidence files. I'm pulling this and that. And so here's this stack of stuff. Have at it, Mr. Goodman, and thank you very much. And that's it. That's it. I didn't hear back until the last day.
That can be a daunting experience when it's like that.
Yes, it's terrible. To your point, it's a terrible experience. You're sitting there like, oh my God, I couldn't sleep. I'm like,
you're sweating. I mean, everybody's freaking out behind you.
I
I
saw
get
it in the
it.
hallway. I'm like, is he going to give you that look? Like, oh
Yeah.
man, you're screwing up. It's like, I don't know how to look. So please, if you're listening out there, you're an aspiring auditor, make it positive. It's already hard enough, like Alphia said. People are going to be nervous. Give somebody a handshake, give them a look in the eye, and just say, hey,
Some encouragement.
I'm here to help you.
Right. That's funny.
So what tips do you have for businesses to prepare for an audit and make the process as smooth as possible? I think we've covered a couple of those, but
We
do
cover a
you
couple,
have
I
anything
think,
else?
yeah, we cover a couple of these, but I think, when we first started going down this path of being audit, we have an ISO audit and we successfully have an ISO rating, an ISO certification and a CMMI rating. And when we started doing this work here at Moser, I think it was so beneficial once we got into the work to see that we were already doing the work. That was great. And I've worked with a couple of Moser clients, when they started this process. And, and then same thing, hey, you're already doing the work. That's the best thing about it. It's like if you're following a standard or a guideline, some kind of a SDLC framework, you're doing the work that could make you, likely to pass an audit. It's about connecting the dots from leadership into that work. And so once you're able to connect the dots, that's it. You're successfully doing the work that could, enable you to pass an audit successfully. And so that's what you get out of this. So being able to just add a big picture saying, what are the processes? What are the steps to do work here? And so we mapped out from sales to delivery. What are the steps between sales and delivery? Right. And so those are your steps. Those are your big processes. And then you tie that into oversight of an auditor, or in my case, quality management, and then you have oversight of leadership. So once you connect the dots here, leadership, quality, and then the processes, it all lays out. And so it's easy to do if you look at it from that perspective. Just connect the dots, and 9 times out of 10, you're already doing the work. Just connect it.
Connecting the dot, that's key. So let's talk about the evolution of the auditor, of the role of the auditors evolved. So how has the role of auditors evolved with the advent of new technologies and data analytics?
I think that's a multi-perspective question. I think from the perspective of the auditor, we leverage in all of our lives, and we leverage AI to, you show me the answers for this, or what are the numbers for this, or how can I approach this? So we use AI in doing metrics and delivery to help us do our jobs better and more efficiently. What I haven't seen yet, like from the role of the framework of doing an audit, like data analytics, those are part of the audit. Like, how do we control and how do we secure data? I haven't seen yet how we do an audit. Like, how do we audit how a company leverages AI? I don't think those rules have been defined yet in the industry. I haven't seen it. So I'm really interested to see that. They actually included in an audit, how do you leverage remote policies now that we are working from home? That was part of our last audit, So I haven't seen how they've incorporated the rules around AI in an audit. So how do we audit that? So from doing an audit, we use it to kind of help us do work more efficiently. But in being audited, I don't know that answer yet. I don't know if it's been defined yet.
That's an interesting audit, just the working from home policies and all that. That would have been nice to be a part of and just understand the metrics around it and the parameters that they put on around that. That would be
actually in my last audit too. They asked me, like an audit I think I did in December. We had in November, December. They asked me because they have to change with times, right? And so the question was, how do we prepare for? It wasn't disaster recovery, but it was like our environmental changes. And what they were asking for, because I was like, were you talking about environment like for the system, for our company? But they were talking about, no, like if there's an earthquake, what are you going to do? Climate change, that was a term. Climate, how do we prepare for climate change? And I was like, oh, I don't know. We thought about, climate change, they're like, so like as the world changes, the questions and the tone of an audit changes to reflect that. So like those are very new, how do we work remotely due to COVID? How do we prepare for climate change because that's what we're experiencing? And those are the things we're gonna have to start addressing and like taking a full look at, things that we haven't had to think about before.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So before we go, any final word of advice for a business who might be thinking about auditing their systems, their processes, or who might be undergoing an upcoming audit?
Yeah, I would say do it. I mean, there only good things can come from preparing for an audit. Only good things can come because you're going to either expose your risk or you're going to expose your opportunities. I mean, those are the two things that can come from it.
Yeah.
So for sure, do it so you can fix those things, mitigate those risks, and exploit your opportunities. Those are some very common terms that we use in this space. Only good things and positive things can come from either one of those. And like if you're getting ready for, just be consistent. Make sure you're doing your homework, and because outside of the actual audit, I audit groups and processes all the time, so just having those touch points with key folk around the company, it makes them less angsty when I have to talk to them for an audit because I've talked to them already about the work that they're doing. So just having that camaraderie and those relationships prior to the audit will make things better for everybody.
I agree. That's a key thing that people sometimes overlook just because maybe they want to feel like, hey, I've got all this power because I'm an auditor coming in. But listen, don't be that guy.
They're just folk. They're regular folk, and and we treat we just have that respect for each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't be that guy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Don't be that guy.
All right. Alphia Stephens, thank you very much for joining us at ASCII to talk about audits. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Angel, for having me. I'll talk to you next week about that process.
Thank you.
That was the best conversation about audits I've ever heard.
Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Ask Anything presented by Moser Consulting. We hope you enjoyed listening to Alphia Stephens talking to us about audits. Be sure to join us next time as we dive even deeper with our resident experts on what they're currently working on. Don't forget to share your ideas or topics with us on social media. In the meantime, please remember to give us a rating and subscribe to our feed wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, it was findings. That's the term I was thinking about. So long, everybody.